everybody, it's me, Jennifer from Little Metal Foxes, and I wanted to do a quick look at testing out some coral and see if it's real or not. And so, hello, hi there. And so anyway, I think this is going to be a good way to sort of test it out and see. I ended up with a live auction, or a silent auction for the Seattle Metals Guild, and we had a big donation of coral, and I had some other coral that I had gotten previously that was vintage, and I wasn't sure if it was Jen. I wasn't sure if it was real or you know, glass or composite or bone. So sometimes it's hard to tell with coral what it is, and I wanted to sort of test it out for myself and see. So what I did a little research to see what tests there are out there for coral. There's definitely a heat test that you can do with coral, like you can with other stones, to see if they're plastic. And usually you can tell if it's plastic just kind of by the sound and the feel of it. It's really light and sort of this little, you know, little clicky. Sometimes it's a dead giveaway. Or if you see mold lines, you know it's going to be plastic or potentially glass. And that's another thing that you may see with coral. But this one is a very old vintage piece that is a very long, beautiful piece of coral, a coral necklace that I just really wanted to sort of find out a little bit more about it. And one of the things that I saw as I was doing some research is that one of the guys was saying that if it is a little too red to believe, that it's probably either A, dyed, or B, not real coral. So a lot of the Italian coral, like this piece, is a little more orange-ish, not quite so stunningly red. And I can see on these especially, there's, you know, some really lovely flaws. You can see the coral growths, the imperfections in the coral, and it is definitely a natural coral. So I wanted to sort of check it and make sure to see indeed that it's a natural coral, and to check and see if it was dyed. So this piece was neither dyed, and it is real. So it's a natural coral. But you know, it's a really lovely, like I said, a little more of a orange than a red, kind of what you would think of coral. So one of the other ones that I wanted to test was this one. Is like, oh, they're all so perfect and it's bright and shiny. I'm like, maybe glass, I don't know. So one of the tests you can do is use white vinegar, and they say dilute it with water a little bit so that you're not using a full strength. And if you can find one that's like on the end of a necklace or chain, or, you know, on the back side of an earring, it's hard to sort of do it with a Q-tip. I found it's much easier when you're testing them to see if it's real to kind of submerge it a little bit. But what happens when you put them into the diluted white vinegar is that they will start to have tiny little bubbles. And I found that if I do it in something that is a clear dish like this, I can see that, I mean, they are tiny little bubbles, not like big bubbling action, but tiny little bubbles start to form on the surface. And sometimes it takes a minute for it to happen, but I found that this one does indeed show tiny little bubbles. So it's like tiny bubbles on this one. The thing that you'll find, and I'm going to rinse that with some fresh water here in a second, but the thing that'll happen when you do that too is it'll kind of matte the surface a little bit, because coral is primarily calcium carbonate, and acid calcium, it will start to sort of dissolve it. So it really does kind of matte that surface a little bit. And you can see where it sort of is matte where I dipped it and shiny where I didn't. So, so yeah, those are going to be a little matte now. And I may be able to get them to polish back up pretty quickly because they are coral. And coral will always feel very smooth. It shouldn't feel coarse or rough. Sometimes that'd be bone that's been dyed to look like coral. The other thing I find when, if it's been dyed, sometimes the dye will just, that's what that was, white vinegar, and sometimes the dye will come out in the vinegar and it's like, dyed, but real coral probably. And that's a really quick way to sort of test to see if it's real, probably. Some composite corals may show some of the same signs, I think, but on the ones that I tested, all of mine are real coral. A number of them are dyed. Now, I did find that some of them are they're marked, so that sort of gives you a clue if they're dyed. But it says coral, but it could be coral colored beads, it could be coral glass, it could be one of a couple of things. So to test it, try that vinegar test, and sometimes it takes a minute for it to start to bubble, but get it in some good light where you can see, like in a clear bowl, and if you need a magnifier, you might want to use that. It makes it a little bit easier because they're very, very, very delicate little bubbles on the surface. It doesn't usually not like an Alka-Seltzer, it doesn't do that. But one of the other things you can test is, if it's dyed, is using a little bit of acetone. And acetone will usually lift the color up a little bit, and by rubbing the coral, here we go, rubbing the coral with a Q-tip that has a little bit of acetone on it, you can usually see pretty quickly. And it sometimes takes just a second. And again, test this on a spot that's not going to be seen at like the back of the piece or the back of a necklace, so that you're not lifting out a lot of color and ruining a piece that might be important. So it's still wearable. You know, if it's coral, that's great. But you know, it's good to know if it's dyed. And again, anything that is looks a little too good to be true just might be. So you can kind of see if I can get that. Yeah, you can see that red coming off on the Q-tips. So I have some fresh ones, so I'm testing each strand with a different Q-tip so I can really kind of see. One of the ones that I did came out very, here we go, very orange-ish. So it, yeah, there you go, very orangey yellow. So, you know, kind of a coral color. So those are two easy ways to test. One of the other things that I ran across recently and is the carved coral, like roses and things like that. Those a lot of times are molded, and it's good to check and see if they are plastic or composite. It's not unusual. And a lot of times the little coral roses, like these, like a little rose like that, they're very sweet. And mine are vintage as well. And the thing that I sort of look at when I'm looking at these is a lot of times you can see the natural coral pattern on the back. You can kind of see a little bit of the growth of the coral in that. And if it is, you know, kind of red all the way through, or kind of that orangey red all the way through, usually it's a good indication that it is, one, real coral. And you can test these, again, be careful because you don't want to like mat out a really lovely carved piece. But you can kind of test it on the back. The other thing I find is that from the back, they're a little more organic. A lot of times they're carved with the shape of the coral, so you'll find that a lot of times they're a little uneven, and that's usually kind of what I look for when I'm looking for these. These can be carved shell, which also is calcium carbonate and also can bubble with vinegar. So you may find that they may be a carved dyed shell that is not necessarily coral. So like I said, I usually am looking for the kind of like natural growth lines, like that radial pattern that the coral has. But I did run across some recently, and somebody was, by no fault of their own, had bought them, I think in Italy, and as vintage Italian coral. And it was really obvious to me when I picked them up and looked at it that the edges were a little crisp, and when I turned it over and looked at the back, it looked like cast resin, which sort of sinks in and has like a very crisp edge around the top that looks like it's been poured into a mold. which this was indeed that. So that was either, you know, a resin or reconstituted coral, but it poured into a mold, but definitely not natural coral of any kind. So anyway, one of the other things I usually try and do, just for my own self, I love coral. A lot of my work is based on a lot of water pieces, so that's kind of important with my own work. And so I do have some things that are sort of natural stones and objects from the beach, and but I especially love coral. And there's a really good a lot of people that are doing some really good work in the oceans. One of them is Chasing Coral, and they do research on bleaching of coral bleaching events, and it's kind of that phase where coral is dying. And they documented several that are really tragic, because some of them are, you know, thousands of years old, that are going through these bleaching events. I would recommend checking them out. I have, for myself, I have a very, I like to make sure I'm buying vintage coral, not anything that's new, and I use it very sparingly, because I know that it is something that is incredibly precious, and so I try to be careful about that. But for more information about coral reefs, definitely check out Chasing Coral. Also, Sylvia Earle has done a lot of research on coral as well, and just ocean botanicals, and she's one of my heroes. I love her, and she works with a lot of other documentary people that do amazing stuff, and the Ocean Conservancy. So those people I have very big respect for. I do like to make sure that, you know, with anybody that is talking about coral, making sure that it's sustainably harvested or vintage. And if you want to, you know, work with coral but don't want to disturb any coral reefs or any of the natural habitat, there's absolutely nothing wrong with using synthetic coral or something else. So it's just, I find a lovely, beautiful, very precious material, and have a deep appreciation for it. So if you want to know if it's real or not, there's lots of ways to do that. Another way, and I didn't test this out, but another way that I have found, or I've heard, but I didn't see any big results or change with it, is milk. So some sites will say that you can take coral and put it in milk, like natural undyed coral, and it will change the milk to pink. And I don't know how long you need to leave it in there or what kind of milk you need to use, but I couldn't find anything other than like on YouTube that had a lot of it. But I know that these two tests are ways that you can sort of check and see, and you know, look under a 10 times loop, and you can usually see some of the pattern lines. If the surface is nice and smooth and beautiful, a lot of times it is coral. If it's a little more porous or grainy, a lot of times it can be bone. It's it's a lovely material, and I hope that you guys can check it out, and maybe this is helpful in your own studio to see, you know, what it is, and find ways to protect yourself in case somebody is trying to, you know, sell you some really expensive coral and you have your doubts. So I've been very lucky to find mine at, you know, some auctions and vintage sales and places like that. So, and then I kind of test it and see what it is. So I look for pieces that are attractive to me rather than super expensive. And sometimes I run across a really lovely piece like this one. I think it's like it's like 48 inches, I think, or more, but it's more than 48 inches. It's 6 feet long. So it's a really lovely piece, I think probably from the 20s. So anyway, it's, so check it out. You know, if you've got some coral you want to test, do that. If you want to go back and watch this later or watch any of our previous tool tips, check us out on YouTube or join up here, and you can see some of the other. We have like 80 some odd tool tips right now, so check it out and see what the other ones are. If you've got some ideas for tool tips, give us a shout, DM us, and let us do a tool tip for you, and sort of do some research and investigation. We're going to do some more is it real testing on things like amber and malachite and a couple of other things to sort of see what is real and what's not, and how you can tell the difference. So sort of a gemstone tip. And hopefully, I think we're going to have one of our friends that's a gem dealer join us coming up soon, and talk about some of his gemstones and the advantages to being able to work directly with a gem dealer and a gem professional that is GIA certified, and how you can find those people and what kind of benefits you can find through them, and demystify that a little bit for people that are working with stones and aren't sure where to get them or who to trust, and how to work that out. So we're going to do some more of that. We do have some stone setting classes that are coming up. We've got chime ball. We've got all kinds of great stuff coming up. So do check out our website, and if you're signed up for the newsletter, you know about some of those events. We also have some of our tool tips with what's going on, and I'm going to have a little more information about this, is it real or not, in our newsletter coming up for November. But we also are going to have another discount for the month of November. So if you are signed up with us as a newsletter person, we only do it once a month. We don't want to bombard anybody with a whole lot of email, and we're lazy, so we don't want to do a lot of email. But if you are out there and you want to know what's going on, you want some extra tips and discounts on classes, get signed up for the newsletter. And if you are wanting some tool tips, like I said, let us know what you got and what kind of questions you have, and let us help you answer those questions. All right, we'll see you guys next week. Thanks a lot. Bye.